I've always believed it's the small things that hold a marriage together. A gentle touch on the shoulder, his favorite mug waiting by the kettle, a kiss on the cheek when he walks through the door. But lately, those little gestures feel like whispers in an empty room. Alex barely looks at me anymore. He comes home late, says he's buried in work. I nod, I smile, I pretend to believe it. But deep down, something's wrong, and I can feel it in my bones. So I did what I've always done. I baked. I stood in the kitchen, the warm scent of cinnamon and vanilla wrapping around me like a memory. It's his favorite cake, the one I make every year for his birthday. Not too sweet, just a hint of lemon. I poured everything into it. Not just ingredients, but hope. Maybe if he sees how much I still care, how much I still try, he'll remember what we used to be. Maybe this could be the start of something better. I even picked up those pastries he loves from the bakery on Main, the ones with the flaky crust and cream filling. I tucked them next to the cake, wrapped it all in a navy ribbon, and held it close as I walked to the car. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from something softer. Hope, maybe. Or desperation. I just kept picturing the look on his face when he saw me at the door. Surprised, maybe even touched. That's what I wanted. A spark. A sign. Anything. The drive to Alex's office felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the way the sky had already started to dim, casting everything in that bluish glow that makes the world feel quieter, heavier. I glanced over at the box on the passenger seat at every stoplight, making sure it hadn't shifted. It felt silly, maybe, showing up unannounced like this. But I needed to believe this would mean something to him, that it would remind him I was still here, still trying. I rehearsed what I'd say in my head. Thought I'd bring you something sweet since you've been working so hard. Light, casual, not too emotional. I didn't want him to feel ambushed, just seen. And maybe he'd take a break, share a piece with me, laugh like we used to. I missed his laugh more than I cared to admit. It used to come so easily, especially when we were in the kitchen together, flour on our faces, dancing between timers and boiling pots. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed how empty it was. Just a few cars left, and his was one of them. That gave me a little jolt of relief. At least he was actually here. I grabbed the box, straightened my coat, and started walking toward the entrance. Every step felt heavier than the last. I told myself it was just nerves. Just that flutter of anticipation you get before something good happens. But there was a tightness in my chest I couldn't quite shake. Inside, the building was nearly silent. Just the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of my heels on the polished floor. It felt eerie, like walking into a memory I didn't recognize anymore. I knew this place. I used to meet him here for lunch sometimes, back when we were still us. But tonight, something about the silence felt different. Too still. Like the building was holding its breath. I followed the corridor toward his office, holding the box carefully, trying not to crush the ribbon. The hallway lights were dimmed, and most of the doors were closed. I reached his door, just slightly ajar, and raised my hand to knock. But before I could, I heard it. A low chuckle, a woman's voice. Then, a giggle, intimate, familiar in a way that stopped me cold. I leaned closer, heart thudding. My knuckles hovered midair, frozen. And just like that, the warmth I'd carried all day turned to ice. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, one breath away from the truth, cake in hand, heart wide open. And something inside me started to close. Not from panic, not even heartbreak. But something quieter, sharper. Something I wouldn't fully understand until I saw what was waiting on the other side of that door. I don't know why I pushed the door open just a little more. Maybe I needed proof. Not just sound, but sight. Maybe I hoped I was wrong. That I'd see him typing at his desk, alone, the radio playing quietly. But what I saw, it felt like the air had been punched out of me. Alex wasn't working. He was standing, arms around her, lips pressed to hers like she was the thing he'd missed all day. Her hands clung to his shirt, and his face, the softness in it. That's what broke me. I didn't make a sound. I didn't drop the box. Not yet. I just stood there, held in place by something I couldn't name. Shock, maybe. Or the beginning of something deeper. The kind of hurt that doesn't scream. It whispers, low and cruel, carving its way through bone. I watched for maybe 5 seconds, long enough to know it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't the first time. Their bodies spoke a language I hadn't heard from him in months. Then the box slipped. It was almost like my hands stopped caring. The ribbon loosened, the lid fell, and the cake, our cake, landed face down on the carpet. No one saw me. No one heard it. I stepped back before the frosting even settled. My heartbeat wasn't racing. It was slow, steady, cold. I turned and walked away without wiping the tears that hadn't even come yet. Because there was no room for tears. Not yet. I made it back to the car without looking back. The box was still open in my hands, crushed a little at the edges. Smudges of icing had clung to my coat. I didn't care. I didn't feel anything, not really. Just that strange, buzzing numbness that comes when your world tilts on its axis and no one else notices. I sat there in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel like it was the only solid thing I had left. The streetlights cast long shadows across the dashboard. Everything looked the same. But I wasn't. You always think you'll scream, that you'll throw something, that you'll charge in and demand answers, demand justice. But when you're standing in the moment, in that moment, all you want is to disappear, or rewind, or just pause long enough to catch your breath. I didn't want him to know I'd seen. Not yet. Let them feel safe. Let them believe they'd gotten away with it. Let them keep their stolen kisses and whispers. I'd learned something far more valuable in that doorway. I'd learned I was done begging for crumbs. I was done baking love into cakes only to be fed lies in return. And I was done being the woman who quietly swallows her own heartbreak to keep the peace. No, I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to wait, quietly, calmly, and take back the power they thought I'd never have. Because revenge doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it walks out with frosting on its coat and a smile no one sees coming. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed beside a man who smelled faintly of a perfume I didn't wear. He snored softly, like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't pressed his lips to another woman hours before. I stared at the ceiling, the moonlight slicing through the blinds, tracing quiet lines across our bedroom wall. My chest didn't rise in sobs. My pillow stayed dry. What settled inside me wasn't grief. It was something colder, more precise. I wasn't breaking. I was sharpening. I started to remember the small things. His password written on a sticky note inside his drawer. How his texts synced to the tablet in the living room, where he left his gym bag, the one he always took to late meetings. I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for truth. Because truth, once you have it, is power. And I knew if I waited, if I stayed calm, I could gather every piece. Not to plead, not to argue, but to build something he'd never see coming. He rolled over once, mumbled my name in his sleep. I didn't answer. I just stared at him, at the familiar curve of his shoulders, the soft crease between his brows. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel love. I felt distance, a vast, echoing distance between who we were and who we'd become. And in that silence, something inside me began to move, not with fear, but with clarity. The next morning, I made him breakfast like nothing had changed. Eggs, toast, a little jam, his favorite. He kissed my cheek, told me he had a long day ahead, and left without looking twice. And I let him. I smiled. I even waved from the door. But the moment it shut behind him, I turned around and opened the drawer where he kept the spare keys. Then the tablet. His messages were all there, synced without a second thought, like he'd never imagined I'd look. The first text I read made my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. I took a screenshot, then another. Every "I miss you," every "can't wait to see you again," every time-stamped lie. My hands didn't shake. My breathing stayed steady. It was like my body had stepped into another version of me. Someone colder, smarter, quieter. The kind of woman who doesn't storm and screaming, but watches, collects, waits. Because some betrayals don't deserve rage. They deserve precision. I found GPS records next. He'd shared his location with me years ago for safety. I traced every late night back to a hotel 20 minutes away. Always the same one. Same pattern. And suddenly, everything lined up. The missed calls, the sudden errands, the barely worn gym clothes. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. That would give him time to twist it, to prepare. No. I wanted the full truth. And I wanted him to hand it to me without even realizing it. I started talking to Claire from HR, casually, over coffee at that little spot across from the office. I didn't ask directly, just dropped a few hints. Alex has been so stressed lately, I said. All those late nights. And her expression shifted, just slightly. That tight little smile women give each other when they know more than they're allowed to say. She didn't spill anything. She didn't have to. I saw it in her eyes. The pity, the knowing. And that was enough. I started taking notes, names, dates, times. I backed up everything. The texts, the GPS pings, even a voicemail he left her by accident instead of me. I didn't even recognize his voice in it. So soft. So sweet. A man I hadn't heard in months. A man who wasn't mine anymore. But I didn't let it pull me under. I let it harden me. Each detail was a brick in a wall I was building, one that would stand long after he crumbled. And then I called a lawyer, quietly, professionally. I didn't go in with anger, just questions. What were my rights? What would I keep? What would I lose? The answers came steady, clear, and strangely empowering. I started setting up a private account, moved some funds, got a line on a part-time bookkeeping job I could take from home. I wasn't planning to leave with nothing. No, I was planning to walk out with everything I still deserved, and with my dignity intact. The hardest part wasn't finding the truth. It was pretending I didn't know. Sitting across from him at dinner while he scrolled through his phone, smiling into his lap. Letting him kiss my forehead goodnight with lips that still tasted like betrayal. Every moment felt like theater, like I was cast in a role I never auditioned for. But I played it well. Too well, maybe. He never once looked at me with suspicion. He believed I was still the same woman. And in some ways, I was. But only on the surface. Inside, I was changing. I no longer clung to the idea of fixing us. I let go of the fantasy. And in its place, I built something stronger. Resolve. This wasn't about getting even. It was about standing up, about showing the world, and him, that I saw it all, felt it all, and still chose to carry myself with grace. I wouldn't scream in a parking lot or send angry texts at 2 a.m. That's not who I am. That's not who I ever was. But I would make sure the truth was seen, not just by him, by everyone who mattered. the colleagues who looked up to him, the boss who praised him, the friends who toasted our anniversaries without knowing what he was really toasting to. I wasn't going to bury what he did in the dark. I was going to bring it into the light, carefully, deliberately, and when the moment came, I'd serve it cold. With a slice of cake, of course. A few weeks later, I sent out invitations. Nothing too formal, just a cheerful little email to Alex's office. "Join us for a small appreciation luncheon," I wrote, "to celebrate all the hard work Alex and his team have been doing." I even included a smiling photo of him from a past vacation. People replied quickly, all polite and excited. The secretary even RSVP'd. I smiled when I saw her name. I knew she'd come. They both would. They thought they were safe. I spent the evening before the luncheon baking. A few cakes, some cookies, even his favorite lemon tart. Every swirl of frosting, every carefully piped word. It was all deliberate. Not out of bitterness, but clarity. I wasn't showing up with rage. I was showing up with poise. I chose a soft pink dress, the kind that says, "I'm at peace, even when you're carrying a secret heavy as stone." I practiced my speech in front of the mirror, short, sweet, sincere. When I arrived at the office with the desserts, everyone was smiling. A few people clapped when they saw me, saying how thoughtful I was. I thanked them all. I hugged his boss. I asked someone to help me set up the projector in the corner of the room. "Just a little thank you video," I told them. "For Alex." And as I adjusted the screen, I caught a glimpse of him across the room, arm brushing hers, a low chuckle, that familiar glint in his eye. He never saw it coming. I waited until everyone had filled their plates, until the room buzzed with small talk and laughter. Alex stood beside me, smiling for photos, completely unaware. He kissed my cheek when someone asked for a picture and I let him. I smiled too, not because I meant it, but because the moment deserved it. Then, with a gentle tap of my glass, I asked for everyone's attention. The room quieted. Forks paused mid-air. Alex looked confused, maybe a little touched. He had no idea. "I just wanted to say thank you," I began, "to all of you, for supporting Alex, for your long hours, your dedication." I spoke softly, warmly, nothing dramatic. "I put together a little video," I added, "just a way to honor the man I've known all these years, a glimpse into the journey we've shared." And with that, the lights dimmed slightly, and the screen came to life. I stood at the edge of the room, just close enough to see his face. It started innocently. Pictures of our wedding, a clip of him holding our first dog, vacations, birthdays. People smiled, some even chuckled. Alex relaxed, his arm lightly brushing hers again. And then, the tone shifted. The screen showed a message thread, his name at the top, her replies below. "Last night was perfect. She suspects nothing." Then GPS pins, the hotel name, room numbers, dates, and finally, a blurry but unmistakable image, him, her, locked in a kiss in the office doorway. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Like the room itself couldn't believe what it had just witnessed. I didn't move. No one did. Alex's boss cleared his throat, a tight, awkward sound that shattered whatever illusion had been left standing. The HR director stood, straight-backed and expressionless. "The secretary?" She bolted. I heard the door click shut behind her, heels echoing down the hallway like a final punctuation mark. And Alex, poor, stunned Alex, just stared at the screen, color draining from his face. He turned to me, mouth opening like he might say something, anything. An apology, a lie, a plea. But I raised one hand, just enough to stop him. Not with anger, not even with pain, just calm. I stepped forward, faced the room, and said, "I thought I was bringing you sweetness. Turns out, you already had dessert." A few gasps. Someone let out a soft, "Oh my God." And I smiled, not cruelly but peacefully, because that moment wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. I didn't stay long after that. I thanked his boss again, hugged Claire from HR, collected my serving trays with the grace of someone who hadn't just shattered a man's professional and personal life in under 5 minutes. I walked out into the sun, warm cake still on my fingers, and breathed in a deep, clean breath. The kind you take when the weight is finally off your chest. And as I stepped into my car, I knew I hadn't just exposed a lie. I'd reclaimed my voice. The divorce wasn't messy. He didn't fight me. Not really. I think deep down, he knew he'd lost the right to argue. I kept my voice steady in every meeting. I didn't gloat, didn't cry. I just signed where I needed to sign, answered what I had to answer. I walked away with part of the assets, the house I loved, and something far more important, my dignity. The silence between us now wasn't bitter. It was just final. And that was enough. With the settlement behind me, I turned my attention to something I'd always dreamed of but never dared to start. A little bakery. Nothing fancy. Just a sunlit corner shop downtown with chipped tiles and a secondhand espresso machine. I spent long nights testing recipes, painting walls, choosing the perfect name. It felt like breathing again after holding it in for too long. Every loaf of bread, every frosted cupcake. It wasn't just food. It was a piece of me, finally rising. People started coming. First, a few curious neighbors, then families, then strangers who became regulars. They'd sip their coffee, compliment the lemon tart, and ask if the woman behind the counter was the owner. I'd smile and nod. I never told them the full story. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't need to anymore. I was no longer the woman who found her husband cheating. I was the woman who rose, who rebuilt. One cake at a time. There were moments I still thought of him. Not with longing, not even with anger, just reflection. Like seeing an old photograph of someone you used to know. He became a part of the story, not the whole thing. And that, to me, was healing. Sometimes I'd hear a song we used to dance to in the kitchen, or see his favorite chocolate in the grocery aisle, and I'd pause. But the ache was gone. In its place, a kind of softness, the kind that comes with survival. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I was behind the counter, wiping down trays, when the door chimed. I looked up, and there he was. Alex. Standing in the doorway, soaked from the rain, holding his coat like it might shield him from the past. He looked smaller somehow. Older. Eyes searching the room like he wasn't sure if he should have come in. Our eyes met, and I felt nothing sharp, just stillness. A quiet calm. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile either. He stepped up to the counter and cleared his throat. "Smells like lemon. Still your signature," he said. I nodded, pulled a slice of cake from the display, plated it gently. No words, just hands moving with memory. I set it in front of him. "This one's on the house," I said. And before he could speak again, I added, without bitterness, without drama, just like the lesson. He blinked, then lowered his eyes, took a bite, chewed in silence. I watched him for a moment, fork moving slowly, eyes fixed on the plate. There was no apology, no explanation. And I didn't ask for one. I didn't need it. That cake wasn't for him. It was for me. A symbol, a reminder that I had walked through betrayal, through silence, through the wreckage of what we once were, and still come out standing, still kind, still whole. He finished the slice and looked up like he might say something more, but I had already turned away. I disappeared into the kitchen, the warm hum of the oven greeting me like an old friend. Behind me, the bell above the door chimed once more, and then he was gone. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. There were trays to fill, orders to prepare, and customers to greet. Life, my life, was moving forward, and for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing anything. I was choosing, creating, building something that belonged to me, and only me. Some stories don't need to end with thunder. Sometimes they end in the quiet dignity of knowing who you are, and who you'll never be again. I built a new life not in spite of what happened, but because of it. And every time I hand someone a slice of cake, I smile. Not because everything turned out perfectly, but because I did. And that, after everything, is the sweetest part.